Okay, good morning, good Erev Shabbos. I wanted to share three thoughts about Parshas Naso, which is again an extremely long parsha, and it deals with a number of different themes. So we have a number of halachos that are all sandwiched together in the opening of Parshas Naso, that on the surface of them have nothing to do with each other, and seem almost extraneous to the flow of the Sefer. That in Parshas Bamidbar we talk about the establishment of the Machane, what's going to be the fundamental institution of the Jewish people going forward, and we move to the story of the dedication of the Mishkan at the end of the parsha. But in the meantime, sandwiched in are the halachos of Shiluach Tameim, the dismissal of those who are tamei, who have to leave the camp until they're able to achieve tahara, the sugya of gezel hager, of the someone who steals, God forbid, from a convert, and how atonement is pursued when that convert may have no heirs, again, as opposed to any other member of Klal Yisrael, that if you go back enough generations, you'll find some kind of a relative who is the appropriate heir, but that's totally missing. We have the very strange ritual of the sota, of the woman suspected of infidelity by her husband, and of the nazir, of the person who takes on these vows of spiritual discipline as a personal pledge. And then Birchas Kohanim, and then the halachas of what we call duchening today, of the Kohanim blessing the people. So Tziyuda Cook has a fascinating suggestion to explain the relationship of all of these halachas to the overarching themes of the Sefer. The Machane, the camp, right, which again we read about last week in great detail, very structured, right? Every shevet has its own place. Shevet Levi has their own place, again divided by jobs, and this certainly Yaakov Kamenetsky builds on the idea that this describes kind of the varied nature of Klal Yisrael, the idea that each shevet has its own mission, its own agenda, and so forth, and the idea that everyone has their own place. But almost definitionally, any time that you establish a structure, no structure is going to be perfect. And there are always going to be those who are left behind in the structure, right, that don't fit in to the boxes, right? So notwithstanding the fact that the Machane is this wonderful institution, right, where each shevet, and again, Herschel also very much develops the idea that the shevet model is supposed to represent the idea of variety within Klal Yisrael, of differentiation, of the idea different people, different groups have different expertise, have different inclinations, have different geniuses, and that needs to be developed. But at the end of the day, there are people that don't fit into the categories. So Tziyuda suggests that each of these each of these mitzvahs, represent someone who doesn't fit in to the box, right? You have people who are tamei, who can't stay in the camp, right? You have the ger, right? The convert, who's not, right? He doesn't play Jewish geography with everyone else. He doesn't have that same web of connections to find the natural place. You have the sota, a woman who is now, right, kind of rejected even within her own family, right, within her own marriage, and the nazir, the person who looks for something else, right, something beyond. And in fact, it's interesting, the nazir is, the aspirational Kohen, who's not a Kohen, right, he can't serve in the Beis HaMikdash, but takes on the halachos of Kahuna, or at least some of the restrictions of Kahuna, in order for his own, to facilitate his own spiritual growth. So Tziyuda says none of these people fit in, right, and the idea is that the Torah here is addressing the idea, right, that they have to be thought of as well, right, that, and it's fascinating. And this I'm just going to add on, that if you look carefully at all these halachos, the Kohanim have critical roles to play with all of these people. Now, I might have thought that the Kohanim are in the center of the camp, right? It's all, the function of the camp, right, is the honor and to facilitate the role of the Kohanim. But the Kohanim have to be concerned for those who don't fit in, those who are literally or psychologically sent out from the camp, right, that they have to have them in mind, right, and they are the one who are the vehicle of bracha for those people. And again, it's just fascinating to note that in halacha, we talk about the idea that if you have a shul that's all Kohanim, all of them Tochen, so who gets the bracha, right? So we say it's the Am Shabbasados, right? The bracha radiates out of the shul, right? And the idea that any institution, right? Be it a school, a yeshiva, a shul, a community, right? Creates beautiful boxes, right? Beautiful structure, right? For the community to thrive, for people to grow, but none can be perfect, right? None can deal with every situation. The idea that there has to be that flexibility, both of structure, but of being able to connect to the people outside the structure, that perhaps is the roadmap the Parshas Naso provides us with. We then have the story of the Korbanos Hanasim, of all of the sacrifices brought by the princes of each tribe to dedicate the Mishkan. Torah allows tremendous detail, and they're all exactly the same, right? Every Nasi brings the same korban as everyone else. So the Abravanel suggests that this was a very considered move on the part of the Nisim, that they did not want to begin the Mishkan, right, with a situation of competition, right, keeping up with the Joneses between the Shvatim, right, and the idea that if you go back, that has been kind of the dark and underbelly to religious life, all the way back to Cain and Hevel, right, to the first recorded sacrifice in the Torah. What comes out of it, right? Instead of it being a device, right, where each person in their own way uses this to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, becomes the avenue for this kind of fundamental struggle, right, between brothers. And the Nisim didn't want that. They said, we're all going to give exactly the same thing, right? We're not going to engage in a back and forth. And again, this also, in certain ways, is like our last idea, right? Is part of the challenge, right, of the Shevet model, right? And the Shevet model has almost implicit within it the potential for divisiveness, the potential for competition, right? In the darkest kind of way, right? And the idea, and it's interesting, the Medrash in Bamidbar Rabbah emphasizes the idea that within the context of these identical korbanos, each Nasi had a totally different kavanah, had a different intention, right? That reflected the reality of their Shevet's philosophy, their Shevet's history, right? And that within that uniformity, they were able to capture that diversity as well. So that's thought number two. Our Haftorah is fascinating. Haftorah, the story of Eishes Manoach, the revelation to the wife of this fellow from the tribe of Dan, who is going to bear a special child, who is going to be a savior of the Jewish people. And we're told that the Malach gives her very specific instructions of the Naziros, right, of the, and this brings us back to the parasha, right, the dedication to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's going to be expressed through this very special discipline that both the child and while the child is in utero, that she is going to have to involve herself in. And Manoach has a very difficult time with this and asks that the Malach should return to them so that he should hear it himself. So Rav Shimon Schwab has a fascinating reading of those psukim, right, of what the Malach repeats, right? Is this just that Manoach didn't believe his wife? He needs to hear it for himself. So Rav Schwab very cleverly rereads the psukim, and he says that what we have in those psukim is actually, that can be read grammatically, that Manoach also, right, has to take on this Nazirus. And he says this is a message about chinuch, right? The idea that if you're going to raise a Nazir, to expect that of a child without being able to walk the walk yourself, right? That is a classic pitfall in the world of chinuch, right? The idea that children learn much more from what they see and what they observe are the values from the parents than they do from whatever best intentioned aspirations, right, are expressed. I want to suggest, though, on top of Rav Schwab's idea, which I think is a very worthwhile idea, there's also a message here about the role of religious growth within a marriage. And the idea that often, and this is something that I've seen before, that when you have a spouse that's going through something of a period of growing intensification in terms of their engagement with, whether it be halacha, whether it be davening, whether it be Shabbos, whether it be any matter of Judaism, right, connecting to learning, that one has to be very, very careful to be able to create a parity that both spouses are simultaneously engaged in a process, right? That it's bad both from a religious perspective, but also from a shalom bayis perspective, right? The idea that this has to be a mutual kind of journey, right? And the idea that if Eishes Manoach, right, is in this zone, right, where she is focused on the child she's going to bear, right, and Manoach's just kind of living his life the way he did before, that's also not going to take, right? That it's not just a question of chinuch, it's also perhaps a fundamental message about marriage as well. A good Shabbos to all.